Good morning.
Good morning.
What an honor it is for the Ephraim Historical Foundation to be included in the Hanseatic exhibition celebrating the life and work of Karsten and Ellen Topelmann. With true humility, I offer these words about two Ephraimites who said yes to the hero's journey. These expressive individuals, an ocean away from their German birthland, somehow found each other and together created a legacy of art. I've been charged with placing the Topelmanns in the historical context of Door County, especially Ephraim, and also in the context of world events and social customs that influence their lives, which in turn shape their art. I'll share words attributed to Karsten and Ellen gleaned from newspaper articles and brochures, as well as stories I've heard about them. All in about 20 minutes. How can this be done? Well, of course it can't. And so today, I invite you to listen, reflect, and respond, not academically, but from the heart. For that is the kind of people they were. Together, we'll lift up the Topelmanns as a compelling example of Door County's late 20th century artists. I'll call them the Resume One group. These artists arrived in Door County around 1970. I'll mention quite a few names, not to be a name dropper, but to perhaps spark a memory for those who knew them and to light a fire of curiosity for those of you who didn't. We'll take questions, Cody and I, that is, after Cody speaks, and he will be following me, as you know, sharing some information and some thoughts about pieces from the Foundation's collection. I'm not going to focus on their painting style and techniques, but we'll share a handout, or have shared a handout, with 1970s articles describing their work. One is from the Resume One booklet, which is this one. One's from the Resume One booklet. Oh gosh, now I gotta find my place again. Another was written in 1978 by Ephraimite Henry Shea. It's a real period piece with the phrase feminine side and links the Who Loves Ya Baby TV detective Kojak to the Topelmanns. The last page of the handout features images quite different from what is exhibited here, and I will share some thoughts. As we talk about the Topelmanns, be aware of the values reflected in their life choices and in their art. Values like hospitality, resourcefulness, and living with joy. Joy, reportedly Ellen's favorite word. And pay attention to the things that sustain them, no matter their circumstances, because they just might be the same things that can sustain us today. Things like community, the sacred, and relationship. They poured themselves into their relationship with each other, someone told me. How wise. I am speaking in abstractions. It's time to paint concrete images. Let's start by imagining the landscape that drew the Topelmanns and other artists to Door County. 50-some years ago, Door County looked different. It was more pure then, remembered someone I spoke with, adding, it was a magical time. Less traffic, less crowded, said others. The peninsula was quite pastoral and peppered with farms, including Jake Christensen's strawberry fields at the top of Little Sister Hill near today's Associated Bank. Teens drove past in gas guzzler cars with rooming V8 engines singing, "Strawberry fields forever." It's true, they really did. Rolling meadows, orchards, and pasture land with scattered woods, and more birch, Karsten's favorite tree to paint. You see, the forest that had grown up after Wisconsin's logging era was younger than today. See if you can spot birch trees in this exhibition, including several seen through a window in one of Ellen's paintings. Silvery, low bluffs cut through the land, and Lake Michigan's cerulean blue waters surrounded it all. Eye-popping stories were still on everyone's lips, tales like the one of old John Kadonko, who once farmed on Middle Road in Peninsula Park. Did you hear he disappeared in the Ephraim swamp after playing cards at a local tavern? Condos, Just on the horizon, National Geographic. Now that was something on everyone's lips. Did you read that Kingdom So Delicious article in the 1969 March issue, people asked. How's about that photo of Ephraim's two steepled skylines? Do you think that kind of publicity will bring more tourists? Spoken in a Door County dialect, sounding like Yooper with a dash of Scandinavian, one I cannot easily imitate, a dialect that has almost disappeared. On June 16, 1969, Madeline Turtelow's column, Artists Around, appeared in the Door County Advocate. She was writing for the Peninsula School of Art, a venture she'd established in 1965. It had evolved from the Ephraim Art School she founded way back in 1943, located behind the Anderson Hotel on Highway Q. Turtelow wrote, "Art attracts art, and there seems to be no saturation point as long as the tourist influx is on the increase. The range in painting is realism through the abstract, and the crafts from candles and hooked rugs through pottery, glass, jewelry, and weaving. It looks like a good season for the arts in general." She goes on to mention Dick Lauder's gallery near Fish Creek's Nordor Ski Hill, newly opened Edgewood Orchard Galleries, and Mildred Armato, who had set up shop in Miss Emma Tuff's former Bailey's Harbor home, renamed the Red Geranium. Millie Armato's portrait by Jim Ingerson hangs behind you in the upper gallery. A portrait of Phyllis Ingerson, Jim's wife, is on the opposite wall. The Ingersons and Topelmanns became good friends in part through the long-running sketch sessions at the Ingersons' barn. The Ingersons, Topelmanns, and folks like Chicken Soup Peterson were the older cohort of the wave of artists circa 1970 who sought a different, more creative lifestyle. But back to the paintings overhead, from ponchos to an oversized Southwestern silver-style belt buckle, these period portraits scream 1970s fashion. Armato wears jeans, which is remarkable when one considers that at the same time Gibraltar teacher Eunice Rutherford was doggedly petitioning the school board to be allowed to wear a pantsuit. Enter the Topelmanns. They'd vacationed in northeast Wisconsin shortly after immigrating from Germany, separately before they met. Karsten immigrated from Munich in the south, Ellen from Hamburg in the north. Hundreds of thousands of Germans came to the U.S. in the early 50s. The 10-year Allied occupation of West Germany, where Karsten and Ellen lived, ended in 1954. As cumbersome as it might have been arranging sponsors, imagine the bureaucracy they would have faced if they lived in Russian-occupied East Germany. The Door Peninsula impressed them both. For Karsten, the endless possibilities of plein air painting were especially captivating. After meeting in Chicago, marrying, and having children, the Topelmanns began to vacation here as a family. Later, Ellen reflected on painting and sketching during their weeks-long summer trips. "We were overwhelmed by the beauty," she said. "We had to become year-round residents." By 1971, they owned 80 acres near Jacksonport. On Sunday drives in their beater car, Ellen would say in a thick German accent, "Bach in heaven." When the Topelmanns purchased a ramshackle Ephraim house with outdated cottages, they began living their dream of being full-time artists. The Hanseatic Gallery opened in 1972. According to son Lars, Mom was determined and strong. She worked the business. Dad was not so sure it would really work. It was a daring move. At the time, friends and relatives thought the Topelmanns foolhardy. Karsten was employed as art director for a Chicago corporation, a position he held for 17 years. He was in his early 40s, peak earning years, with 3 children under the age of 12. If that were not cause for concern, the Ephraim house initially had no electricity, no running water, and no insulation. Did Karsten, a 20th century man, simply dismiss society's expectations of him as the family's primary financial provider? No. Resourcefulness was something both he and Ellen had to master as children. Remember, they grew up in Nazi Germany, where scrounging for lumps of coal falling from trains could mean the difference between surviving winter cold or freezing to death. Soon after opening the gallery, Karsten secured paid work designing Door County tourism publications. He monetized graphic design skills that had supplemented his classical training while a student at a prestigious Munich academy. Typography was a strength. Just look at the balance and control in his signature. By the way, be sure to notice Ellen's signature too. One of its letters, the O with the slash, is a giveaway that she has Scandinavian blood. It's an alphabet letter used by the Danes and Norwegians. Her great-great-great, could be another great-grandfather, was a lighthouse keeper on Denmark's, here we go, gotta see if I can pronounce this right, Sprague Island. Kind of?
Say it.
Okay. Let's move on. Karsten had been lucky enough to have Fritz Emke as a professor. Several of Emke's typesets are still used today. Karsten's architect father was another important influence. Karsten, it seems to me, also had an intuitive understanding of branding. Despite being described by one longtime friend as more of a dreamer, he could meet deadlines, critical and graphic design contracts. Did Ellen occasionally prod him? I wonder. Fearball medallions, created pro bono decades later, also reveal this man's eye for graphic design. Ellen, Kate, Anna Sprague brought her own brand of optimistic resourcefulness and German discipline. I was told, for example, she cranked out small, affordable floral paintings that sold well. As for her time-consuming acrylic work, Lars and Lisa recalled their Muda painting late into the night after completing a myriad of tasks. It seems societal expectations impacted Ellen's life as an artist, too. Undoubtedly, roles evolved and the freedom to paint increased as the children grew and the gallery turned a profit. But in the early years, Ellen was keen on making sure her husband had time to paint. Karsten, classically trained, visited places at different times to photograph the light and take notes in his journal. Both Topelmanns staffed the gallery. In time, they would hold court with visitors. Ellen was especially curious about how couples met, and Karsten loved to talk about his art. When the Hanseatic first opened, customers heard the thumping of footsteps in the rooms above as the children played. I wonder if sometimes they were sent outside, as we all were back then, to bike or play with friends, to run wild, as Lars and Lisa described it recently. Ellen's resourcefulness extended to meals. A friend remembered a freezer stocked, and I mean stocked, with fish. She said jokingly, "Where did it all come from? Was she picking up fish that had washed ashore?" Ellen got day-old bread from Wilson's to make bread pudding and gave leftover crumbs to outdoor stray cats. In February, the family tapped trees for maple syrup. They gathered morels and chanterelles from the woods. Ellen was also known for her onion and potato dark bread, with a handful of coffee grounds added to sharpen the flavor. Nothing was wasted. If someone in the family raised an eyebrow, she said, "I lived through the war." Our house always had an open door, remembered daughter Lisa. Lunch parties with soup and homemade rolls happened especially around Oktoberfest. Guests included watercolor teacher Frances Vale and artist Andy Redmond. Did vinyl records spin and later CDs play in the background? If so, friends heard music by classical composers Dvorak and Wagner. It was not jazz. Ellen told Karsten early on that she was not a jazz fan. In later years, the Topelmanns served tea in exquisite cups, Lomonosov porcelain, I think the tulip design, and cobalt. See if I'm right by finding the teacup in an exhibition painting here. These were from St. Petersburg, Russia, which they knew as Leningrad until the 1989 fall of the Berlin Wall. By this time, a good black tea was easy to find in Door County. How different from the 70s, when local tea and coffee choices were so very, very limited. The Topelmanns were not alone in hosting and attending galleries, especially potlucks. In those days, the season ended right after Labor Day. Restaurants, hotels, and summer theater closed up. Many artists, especially the younger crowd, had little money, surviving on tips from waitressing or carpentry jobs. Lively conversations over simple potluck dinners, hospitality nurtured treasured friendships. Monthly lunch meetings of German immigrant women living in Door County was another way Ellen sought out a feeling of community. While there, they only spoke German. They were not the first Germans to make Door County their home. Germans arrived in Ephraim soon after the founding of the village. In 1853, many farmed the area called the German settlement. In the early 1900s, Welker's Casino, a health spa of sorts owned by a German physician and his wife from Milwaukee, attracted a German clientele. During the World Wars, there was anti-German sentiment. Sturgeon Bay High School banned teaching German for a short time. And Ephraim summer resident, Chicago Symphony Orchestra conductor Frederick Stock resigned for a year following a public outcry. I don't think the Topelmanns experienced much of this, but their strong accents apparently sounded odd to a few of their children's friends. What a contrast to Ephraim's early years, when the Moravian pastor often preached in multiple languages so everyone in the village could understand. Ellen was known to proclaim, "Ephraim is the pearl of the peninsula," and with tenderness, "Our village." What was Ephraim like in 1972 when the Topelmanns opened the gallery? There were 2 gas stations, a Sinclair on the south side and a Texaco closer to the village hall. Proprietors sold Coca-Cola in small glass bottles and candy bars. One Door County native told me he was in high school then and saw grown-ups, including women, exchange money for a brown paper bag filled with hooch. Yes, in dry Ephraim. There were more teens and 20-somethings. The baby boomers were coming of age, men with long sideburns and bushy mustaches, a few wearing surplus olive green army shirts cut off at the shoulders. 1 or 2 local boys had just returned from Vietnam. And young women walked around in long dresses from Nepal, unless they were rushing to the yacht club. Then they wore nautical shorts and crop tops, walking fast in dark brown topsiders. Many were in uniform and hustled to Wilson's or to a local hotel. The Topelmanns were soon seen walking to the beach each morning, wearing bathrobes. They had No running water, after all. They continued the European custom of waking to a bracing swim for years and were once flagged down by a police officer responding to a call to help two old people drowning in the bay. They weren't drowning. They were just swimming enthusiastically. From the beginning, they also strolled Ephraim's shore at sunset, sometimes gathering driftwood to make into picture frames. Did Ellen wear her zebra dress on these strolls? Or did she don another signature look? Blue jeans, a smock, and wooden claws. A round-collared blouse with tiny edelweiss flowers. A doeskin jacket from Bunda's hutch with her long braids accented by a geometric headband. As for Karsten, Ellen made sure the bright hues of his vest and patterned button-down shirt complemented her getup. Never a t-shirt and never a baseball cap, though brimmed hats were allowed. In 1972, did the Topelmann see artist Doris Heisey Miller through the glass window of her shop, Cabin Craft, which was located on the shore. Arranging danskeware or pounding out Art Deco-style jewelry. It was Heisey's last summer. Doris was a part of an earlier wave of artists, the generation that came between the world wars. She opened Cabin Craft during the Great Depression in 1933. That decade, the 1930s, saw the establishment of the Clearing, Peninsula Arts Association, the Ridges Sanctuary, Peninsula Players, a creative and institutional explosion in a backdrop of rampant poverty with war brewing in Europe. In 1933, across the Atlantic, the Topelmanns were coming of age in Hitler's Germany. How different the sights and sounds must have been compared to Ephraim. Knowing the historical context of their childhoods gives insight into Ellen's words from the 1982 Hanseatic brochure. I paint what makes me happy. My happy little people remind me of my childhood in Germany before the war. She wanted to find a way to capture something people hungered for. A decade earlier, Karsten is quoted in the Door County Advocate. Through my paintings, I communicate a sense of mood, atmosphere, and attitude towards life. Peaceful appeal, you might say, something more lasting than momentary visual excitement. He spoke of the challenge of change and the never-ending creativity that Door County offered. The Topelmanns were able to do what mythologist Joseph Campbell counseled. Find a place where there's joy, and the joy will burn out the pain. Art can be therapeutic and healing. Examples of two such paintings are in your handout. The first is Ellen's Madonna-like work. The second is Karsten's, known informally as the Shushing Jesus. It hangs in the Ephraim Moravian Church and has been seen by hundreds of people over the past few decades. Many, including me, have funny stories about this painting. But I want to share words that Mr. Topelmann said to the pastor about this work. He painted it after the loss of their beloved daughter, Tanya, who died at age 22. The pastor asked Karsten, "What do you want people to take away from this painting of Jesus?" He answered, "Be still and know that I am God. be still. Calming oneself. Breathing, finding a safe, sacred space is sometimes all one can do when the world has fallen apart. Let's close by looking at the joyful painting on your right. St. Martin's Festival in Rothenburg, where the Topelmanns had an apartment. Rothenburg was spared the violence of firebombing during World War II. Its medieval charms survived. In the painting, an exuberant crowd celebrates. They carry colorful lanterns as dusk settles over the city. The scene is nostalgic and playful. It's easy to see how Ellen's work in TV animation in Chicago influenced her style. Each little person is special, their clothing adorned with unique details. Ellen was keenly interested in clothing, and as a young woman created remarkable pen and ink fashion drawings. Despite their distinctive styles, the Topelmanns occasionally collaborated. Ellen drew the people, and Karsten the buildings. They surprised each other by adding embellishments. One time, Karsten drew the word love on the ice of a painting by his wife. This painting is a collaboration. What a coincidence that the feast of St. Martin is tomorrow, November 11th. One story about St. Martin, a 4th century bishop, for me has an echo in a story I heard about Karsten. St. Martin's father was an officer in the Roman cavalry, so he was expected to join as well. A pacifist, Martin said if he had to go to battle, he would do so without a weapon. The emperor, infuriated, thought him a coward and ordered him to battle the next day unarmed. Martin prepared to obey the order. Within hours, the opposing army suddenly surrendered, and Martin's life was spared. In 1945, as the Third Reich fell to its knees, Karsten reached the age of majority. He would be conscripted. Years later, he told a friend, "I felt sure this was going to be my destiny." Remarkably, it wasn't. Within a day or two, Germany surrendered. Aren't we lucky that Karsten's destiny, and Ellen's too, turned out so differently? Thank you to those people who shared stories so that I could share them with you today. Thank you for your kind attention. And now I think there's a break. Is that what you-
Like a 5-minute break.
Very short. And then we're going to hear from Foundation Director Cody Schreck.